We are well over the midway point in 2005, and it's starting to get to the point where all those yearly challenges and ambitious goals are just starting to look a little less and less likely. So back in January, I signed up for a few different year-long reading challenges, bingo boards, and a few different one-a-month type of prompt-based challenges. And I thought that today would be a really nice time to go and to check in on how I've been getting on with them, because there's still just about enough time at this point in the year that if I am struggling to hit any of my goals, I can try and really focus in on them without it being that mad frantic dash in December, which I just know I won't achieve and I'll stress myself out. So at the start of the year, I signed up for 4 one prompt a month type of reading challenges. The Golden Girls Reading Challenge, which is hosted by Rachel Fryman, and the Year in Aeldia year-long reading challenge hosted by G at Book Roast. Then I signed up for 2 that are hosted by Kayla at Books and Lala. Buzzword-a-thon, traditional buzzword challenge, where you find a word or a type of word in the title of a book. And one spin-off from that, Buzzword-a-thon cover challenge, where you have to find some kind of design element or theme within the actual cover image itself. I also signed up for a couple of different year-long challenges. These ones don't break it into specific months for me, but the goal obviously is to fill the bingo board or whatever by the end of the year. One sits slightly out of whack with the others, and that is the Our Fantasy Bingo Board. The Our Fantasy board runs from April to April each year rather than January to January. So at the start of the year, I was working on my 2024 board, and I was quite lucky. I had managed quite a lot of those prompts already before the year turned. So in the 3 months that we had from January to March, I think I only had one more prompt to fit onto that Our Fantasy board, and therefore I was really able to get a good head start on some of my 25 goals. Then I have 3 bingo boards that run from January to January. The first is Brie at 4 Paws in the Books 25 in 25 challenge. It is a straightforward 5x5 bingo board. The first is a Dance with Books SFF Title challenge. Then the last one is the Book Foragers cover challenge. It's a little bit like Books and Lala's, but it's a bingo board grid rather than a monthly challenge. So with all of that said, I think the easiest way to do this is going to be to screen record as I talk you through each challenge in a little more detail.
Okay, so we are over in Canva and I'm screen recording. I think this is going to be the easiest way to go through things, but we can change it up if we need to. I'm going to go through the monthly challenges first. There are 2 Buzzwordathon challenges this year. There is the traditional Find the Word in the Title one, and there is the new Find a Visual Element on the Cover. So first off is the traditional Find the Word or the Word theme in the titles. For January, the theme was Truth and Lies, and I read Here Lies Olive by Kate Anderson. This was a kind of YA contemporary paranormal. I actually really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting to. It was a massively overdue arc, and I had a good time with it. I thought the romance was unexpected, and it did some interesting things with grief and guilt. Then in February we had Waterwords, and I spent so long finding a book for this. I was reading it during the Get a Clue Readathon, which was hectic enough as it was, and I think I DNF'd 2 or 3 that all would have worked until eventually I decided I was slightly cheating and counting snow as a water word, and so I read Snowfire by Phyllis A. Whitney. This is an older book, and it is a kind of romantic thriller, but mostly it's a mystery set at a ski lodge. Then in March, we had to find specifically the word thing, and I picked My Darling Dreadful Thing by Johanna van Veen. I really enjoyed this. Another YA, another paranormal, but this time a historical, and it kind of played about with an unreliable narrator. I really liked it. Then in April, we had to find some kind of animal word in the title, and I read The Foxhole Court. This was one I had actually read in February during the Get a Clue Readathon, and this one was a wild ride. It's about a really, really super competitive made up sport. And it was crazy. It was wild. These kids were just left to run riot. Then in May, the word choices were two and two, and I picked But Not Too Bold by Hashi Pueo. This was more like a novella, and it's a kind of gothic murder mystery set in a household that is ruled by, overseen by a kind of spider woman monster. And the newest maidservant she's brought in is having to find out what happened with her predecessor that led to the spider woman eating her predecessor. Then in June we had Memory Words, and I thought this one would be a real struggle, but luckily I had Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite on my TBR. I've read Olivia Waite's historical work, and I was so stoked about this book. I'm not a big sci-fi fan, but I have been trying to read more of it this year, and I thought a cozy mystery, which is one of my top genres, with a sci-fi written by an author I really enjoy, was going to be a 5-star surefire hit. But ultimately, I was let down by it. I think because it was a novella, there wasn't enough time to both write a convincing mystery and also do all the world building that needed to be done, and instead it just kind of fell flat for me. Then July, we had punctuation, so commas, exclamation marks, colons, anything like that. I went with Dylan Mint's Why Cheese. This is one I requested from NetGalley out of pure curiosity, and then 10 minutes after I'd received it, kind of did that, oh no, what have I done? But it was actually really enjoyable. It was a why choose cheese shifter romance that actually looked at some kind of pretty complicated themes, and it surprised me. So next up we have the new Buzzword cover challenge. And so for January we had a pattern on the cover, and for this one I picked Where Foxes Say Goodnight by Sam Burns. This was an indie book with a cozy paranormal mystery slice of life. There was an awful lot going on, while at the same time there wasn't an awful lot going on. It was fine, but I didn't love it the way I had really hoped I would after seeing it wrecked in so many places. You can see on the image that the leaves and the foxes are sort of mirrored, and to me that's a pattern. Then for February we had Skyline, and for this one I picked Guards by Terry Pratchett. I personally have these editions in hardcover. They're kind of really stylized, really simplistic, minimal, only a couple of colours per cover set. And you can see really clearly on this one the outline of that skyline. Then in March, prompt was books, and Caitlin Rosakis's The Grimoire Grammar School Parent Teacher Association was a massively anticipated book for me. I read the author's debut, Dreadful, last year, and I loved it, and I was really happy that this one was completely different but equally brilliant. It's a kind of contemporary where a couple have to move to this magical town because their daughter has been bitten by a werewolf, and then they struggle to fit in with this newfound magical community. In April, we had animals again, so in theory, you could have used the same book for both, but I didn't have an actual animal on my cover for the Foxhole Court, and I wanted something that fit perfectly. So I actually reread an old favourite. I read Cat's Got Your Heart by Gem Zero. This is a kind of annoyances to lovers, and it's about one guy is trying to adopt a shelter cat, and the other guy is very much making it a challenge. I had Chuck Tingle's new Lucky Day put in on this one, but that is not out for a couple of months, so I don't really know what I was thinking there. I do now have a couple of other horror books with eyeballs on the cover, so I might change this out later in the year if I find something that I think fits more clearly. But at this point, I just picked a book in May that I read that had a human with eyes on the cover. You can see I've got The King is Dead by Benjamin Dean. This was a contemporary, I want to say it was the first Black King of Britain. He, I wanted to like this more than I think it just the. Then in June we had Celestial Theme. and I went with The Hands of the Emperor by Victoria Goddard. I loved this book. It was a 5-star for me, but it was nearly 1,000 pages. It's a kind of a political fantasy administrative. We have the kind of and the day-to-day tasks that go into running the kingdom. It also looks at assimilation versus individual culture and that kind of how you can be between your job and your family and how different people see you. I really, really enjoyed it, but because it was so long, I will be counting it for absolutely everything I can to get my full. And I have The Gates of the Feral Gods by Matt Dinniman. This is the 4th book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and to be honest, I would think most on in this series could count for technology on the cover, but this was the one that I've read in July. It's the one I just finished. I read the first Dungeon Crawler Carl purely because it had been getting so hyped, especially the audio version. And honestly, I have went back to back through them, one after the other. As I said, I've just finished book 4, but I'm really excited to get to 5 as soon as I get a new Audible credit, which is a problem because the point was to use up the Audible credits so I could cancel it. But now I'm tied in until at least until at least I've caught up with the series. It's a challenge that I have is the Golden Girls readathon. This is part of a kind of set of reading challenges. There's usually some that run throughout the year in different months. My personal favourite is the October Clue style murder mystery one, but they also have a best girls round and this one a month reading challenge, obviously all based around prompts that relate in some way to the Golden Girls TV show. So January, the prompt was to read a book set in a cold climate, and for this one I picked The Nightmare Before Christmas by Sarah Rush. This was one that was a really easy fill. I had been hoping to get to this in December. It was on my TBR, but I just never got round to it. Even though it had passed that Christmas time of year I was hoping for, I'd seen this so many places. I had seen it so hyped that I was perfectly happy to carry it through. And I'm really glad I did. It was my favourite book I read in January. Unfortunately, I didn't have as much success with the second book in the series, but I do still have really high hopes to try more from this author in the future. Then for February, the prompt was a murder mystery, and I happen to have the perfect fill for this on my NetGalley shelf. Murder by Cheesecake is a Golden Girls cozy mystery, and it couldn't fit better. The mystery itself was maybe not the greatest cozy mystery I've ever read. It was maybe a little bit middling, but the author had such a good grasp of all 4 characters, all 4 actresses, their voices, their mannerisms, the way a scene would be acted out in the show, that it felt like reading an episode of the show in a way that was so, so vivid. I really hope that there are more in this series to come. Then in March, we had to read a prolific female author, so I picked one of my very favourite female authors, Catherine Addison. Catherine Addison has a number of series under that pen name, but she also writes a number of books under a different pen name, so she's definitely prolific. This was The Orb of Cairado. It is a kind of spin-off novella in the world of the Goblin Emperor and the Cemeteries of Amalo series. It was a more academic Indiana Jones style story, and it wasn't my favourite, and I do think it doesn't stand alone brilliantly. It definitely works better if you are kind of familiar with the world, not because of the plot elements, but just because Catherine Addison in this world uses lots of her own language. There's lots of terminology, there's ways of talking to other characters, honorifics and pronouns and things, and I really think it being so short, you wouldn't really have the time or the inclination to grasp that. Whereas if you've read the books in the series, you come in knowing what those kind of different words mean. Then for April, we had Animal on the cover again, and this is fascinating because with Buzzword, I thought it made sense. Both are made by Kayla at Books and Lala. This one, there was no reason for April to also be Animal on the cover, and it just so happens it is. And this one I did just decide to double up on, and I used Cat's Got Your Heart again. Then for me, the prompt was that the main character is a teacher, and for this I actually picked a short story by my favourite short story author. This is Hitting the Books by Johannes T. Evans. It was a male-male romance about a recently qualified teacher who goes back to the school he went to and starts a relationship with one of the teachers he had previously had a crush on. Then in June, we had to read a book from a marginalised community. I went with Bloom by N.R. Walker. There were quite a lot of books I could have picked, but this one I didn't have under any other challenges, so I thought I would get it in there somewhere. This month's prompt in July was to read a book published before you were born, and I haven't got there yet. I don't read an awful lot of older books, and I didn't have anything particularly in mind for this one. One of the Our Fantasy bingo board prompts is to read a book written in the 80s, so if I fill that, I can double up here. If not, I'll probably look for either a Dorothy Whipple book or a Phyllis A. Whitney book. Then my last monthly challenge is the Adventures in Aeldia. This is run in the same world as Book Roast's Magical Readathon. Magical Readathon is that you are going to a magic school, you sit grades based on the books you read, those grades build into subjects, and then those subjects qualify you for an occupation you've picked. You'll get different subjects and different grades depending on what occupation you're ultimately aiming for. The Adventures in Aeldia is kind of set in that same world, but outside of the school. This one was a quest style board. There were different options depending on what path you picked. This is the only monthly readathon where I have tried to stick really closely to reading the specific book in the specific month. The other ones, if I do, that's nice, but I'm not super worried about it. This one, we do get additional points if we read the right book in the right month. In January, I had to read a 2024 release, and so I reread my favourite book from 2024, The Voyage of the Damned by Frances White. This is a queer murder mystery set aboard a magical ship. It has a really interesting type of humour, and I don't think it's for everyone, but if you like the tone, I highly recommend it. I also really recommend picking up the audiobook version. It's narrated by British writer, comedian Nathan Fode, and he does great voices for all the different characters and all the different regions they're from. I think you could really delve into his accent, regional accent choices in a really interesting way. Then for February, March, and April, I really lucked out with the prompts. I was doing the Little Thieves read along with Leandra at TBR0 and Margaret at the Word Nerd. For me personally, this was rereading Little Thieves and then reading Painted Devils for the first time and Holy Terrors when it came out. So I got those for middle left shelf, your own priority TBR, and a W in the author's name. That made those choices really easy. They fit the months perfectly. Then in May, I had to read a dystopia. It's not a genre I tend to lean towards, and I was a little unsure what I was going to pick for it. But The Night in the Butcher Bird by Alex E. Harrow had just came out and was getting quite a lot of hype. I had read Alex E. Harrow's Starling House in the past and really wasn't a fan, but I enjoyed this one, and I think it's given me the kind of confidence that I would maybe try another book from the author and hope kind of best of three. Then for June, we had another mystery book, and again, I put that Murder by Memory back in here. And then for July, the prompt was to read a book entirely in the PM, and I read Lords and Ladies by Terry Pratchett. This was part of a buddy read. I listened to the audiobook, I listened to it at night just before bed. Possibly, maybe it might have ran past midnight a little bit occasionally. I'm not entirely sure, I didn't look, but I think it counts. So then I have the full year bingo board style ones, and I'm going to start out with a Dance with Books SFF Title Challenge. It's exactly what it sounds like, a little bit like Buzzwordathon, except you do have to specifically find these words for every one of them. There's no kind of theming. And I'm not doing as good on this one as I hoped. I do have 5, so that's not the worst in the world, but it's also not half by a considerable number. The worst part of it is that the ones I still have, there's at least a couple here that I genuinely have not a single clue after hours of searching for. If you have any suggestions at all for story or stories in the title, for siege in the title, for any of those ones on the bottom row in the title, to be honest, siege, thorn, any suggestions for those would be very, very much appreciated because I am struggling. The ones I do have, though, I have Voyage of the Damned making a second appearance here under Voyage. For the word Wicked, I actually had probably the most options when I made it to TBR. I had multiple books would have fitted. Specifically, one of the words that would have fitted really well would have been actually Wicked by Gregory Maguire. And I was planning to reread that this year. I'm still planning to reread that this year, or to reread it at some point. I came out of that movie being convinced it was the time. It's been about 15 years since I read Wicked. And when I originally read it, I hated it with every fibre of my being. But now I feel my reading tastes have changed and I might actually enjoy it. But I'm just aware that it's a very heavy book. It's quite a slow paced book. And I've just been putting it off, if I'm honest. Elfie, A Wicked Childhood is a prequel novella. It came out this year and I spotted it on my library's new releases shelf and it just felt like it was kismet and perfect time for picking it up. I didn't hate the book, but I did think that it was very much a supplemental to Wicked. I very much felt that you wouldn't get anything out of this book if you hadn't already read the original Wicked book. Not necessarily the entire series, but I definitely think you wouldn't have got a lot from it if you didn't at least know the characters as they are in the novel, which is very different from the characters as they are in the movie or the musical. For King or Kingdom, I read Tomb of the Sun King, and then for Empire, I read Empire of Shadows. These are the first two books, the only two released books in Jacqueline Benson's Raiders of the Arcana series, which I would very much say is the 1999 The Mummy. If you like that, you'll love this. The second one, specifically Tomb of the Sun King, is obviously set in Egypt. It's perfect for the Mummy fans. Then for C, I have Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. House in the Cerulean Sea was one of my favourite books when it came out. I really loved it. This one, I can see why it was released. It's very much about queer joy and queer resistance, and we definitely need books like that at the moment. But in terms of the actual plot, I don't know that it added enough to the world or to the story to live up to that 5-star of Cerulean Sea. So I've left Canva so that I can set these next to each other. This is Book Forager's Book Pictionary Challenge. It runs a little bit like Books and Lala's cover for Buzzwordathon. You find the image in the cover. The rules are slightly different though. You are allowed to kind of interpret the prompt a lot more. So, for instance, last year one of the prompts was a snail, and I read a hardback with slow pacing. This year, I'm going to try and go a step above. I want to try and be as literal as possible about finding these images on the cover. And although I'm doing really well number wise, I have sort of reached that same impasse that I have with the title challenge. The ones that are left are the ones that are a real struggle. I have loose ideas for most of them, assuming I get the motivation to read those books. But the one I'm really struggling with, and again would love a recommendation for, is a book with a crab on the cover. But to go through them, we had some kind of prehistoric flint knife, and I actually went for the stone claws that you can see on The Tomb of the Dragons by Catherine Addison. This was the final book in the Cemeteries of Amalo series, so I reread the whole series before reading this one. She's one of my favourite authors, and I had a fantastic time catching up. For A Lighthouse, I read By Book or by Crook by Ava Gates. This was a lighthouse library mystery with a really strong, in this book, Jane Austen theme. I adored the setting and I desperately want to live in a library that's been put into a converted lighthouse. But the mystery itself, the town, the characters, they didn't pop for me the way I would really love them to. So I don't think I'll be continuing with the series. Then I have a couple of blanks, the apple, the archery target, the telescope. Telescope is another one. If you have any ideas, I am all for them. I really thought I had one for it, but when I looked at the cover closer, I was wrong. Then for A Human Skull, I have this kind of stylized opera house skull that's on Strange Beasts by Susan J. Morris. That's a historical sapphic mystery that takes the daughters of Mina Harker and Moriarty. So it's a kind of Sherlock Holmes meets Dracula. Then for the stag, I'm using Little Thieves again. For the ruins of a temple-like structure, I'm using The Will of the Many by James Islington. I enjoyed this one fine. I didn't love it. I didn't see the hype that it has got. And honestly, I don't think I'll be continuing with that series. So then we have The Missing Crab, then A Sheath of Wheat. I put Wings in the Valley by Aud Connolly. I love this book. It is the Shire is destroyed by dragons, and the fauns that live in this idyllic Shire, one of them has to go in search of a human dragon slayer to help protect the valley. But when the dragon came, it also wiped out the harpies that lived in the valley. They were the fawn's enemies, and the one remaining harpy has an egg to protect. The harpy and the fawn go on this road trip to find the human dragon slayer with the egg. It's a real enemies to lovers, a real look at the way different cultures interpret things differently, and a kind of reluctant co-parenting road trip that I had a great time with this one. Then for the typewriter, I read another Johannes T. Evans short story, Workplace Connections. This was a 1960s sapphic romance. I would say the sapphic romance is the slither at the end. The real story is about that kind of Mad Men era, gender expectations, lavender marriages, how you play out that kind of thing to your advantage. Mushrooms, don't have. Parasol, don't have. Test tubes, don't have. A stylized sun with a human face, absolutely perfect for the hands of the emperor, sticking that in. And then the last one is a Roman helmet. I read The Blood of Hercules for this by Jasmine Mass, and that's the end of that board. I think these ones are laid out as best as I'm gonna get it. This is Four Paws in a Book's 25 and 25 challenge. Quite a lot of these I obviously have mentioned already, so we should whistle through them. What I will say is I have done really well on this board, and the reason for that is partially that the Our Fantasy Bingo that we're going to talk about in a moment runs from April to April instead of January to January. And that 3 months at the start of the year, I really focused on getting a head start with this one. For 2025 release, I read The Hymn to Dionysus by Natasha Pulley. I was really excited to read another Natasha Pulley book. She's definitely becoming an auto-buy author for me. And this one was a kind of not retelling, but very much Greek mythology inspired. One word title, reused Snowfire. Involves travel, reused Tomb of the Sun King. A number in the title, I read Seven Lively Suspects by Katie Watson. This is part of her Delilah Lively mystery series. They're kind of contemporary cozy mysteries that are based on the idea that Dahlia Lively is a fictional character, a little bit like a young Miss Marple, and she has been played by various actresses over the years. A new movie is coming out, and these three actresses are thrown together, murders happen, and then over the course of the books, they end up investigating various murders together. Cover by, I picked Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. I'm very much not sure I'm a cowboy romance person, so this was definitely bought purely on the basis of how gorgeous these covers are. I do have the second book as well, though, because if I'm going to be in a date and buy books based on the cover, I might as well get lots of them. I've definitely heard that the second book, a lot of people prefer it to the first, so hopefully I'll get to that at some point. For seasonal book, I don't have this filled at the moment, but I am currently reading Dracula Daily, which takes Bram Stoker's Dracula and splits it up into letters that it's written through. And the point is that you read each letter on the relevant day, so it runs you from May to November. So when I get to November and finish Dracula Daily, that'll go in here. LGBTQ plus rep, I picked Chuck Tingle's Bury Your Gaze. It is a horror as a Hollywood writer's career's going sideways. He's being told to kill off his really popular gay characters, and some of the characters from his creation start to come to life. Horrible things happen. This was right at where I'm comfortable with in horror. There were a couple of moments that really did have me almost pulling out my earbuds to not have to listen. I'm trying to get more into horror this year as well, so I've been pushing myself a little, and this one was definitely right up there for me personally. Favourite author's new release, The Tomb of the Dragon slides right in there. Hype book, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. And for colour of the year, I had to pick this one a little bit later. The colour of the year, I think I went with the Pantone one, and it's like I think it's like mocha brown. You can see on Summers at Castle Auburn by Sharon Shin, the kind of brown framing on the cover. This is a book that's been recommended to me by so many people that know my reading taste. I would call it classic YA. There is a bit of romance, there's a little bit of politics in the background, but it's very much a coming of age story, and I really enjoyed it. I think this would be a really good one for fans of things like Tamora Pierce. POC author, we have The King is Dead showing up again there. Novella, we have The Fireborn Blade by Charlotte Bond. This is about a knight who is trying to redeem herself by finding a legendary sword that is guarded by a dragon. This did some really interesting things with multiple timelines. It gave you excerpts from other knights and the quests they've been on, and it had a twist I did not see coming. 5-star prediction, compt, and friend rec are all blank, but I don't think I'll have any problem filling those. Over 400 pages, I am reusing The Will of the Many, special edition reusing Strange Beasts, chapter titles reusing Here Lies Olive. I don't have debut author, but again, that should be easy. I've still got lots of debuts from this year I want to read. For mental health rep, I picked The Two Hungers of Prince Fier by Darcy Ashe. This was a kind of Scottish inspired fantasy that used eating disorders to look at gender roles and how that influenced the ruling of this kingdom. It was really interesting. I'm not sure it was completely successful in what it was trying to do, and the negative reviews it got, definitely I could see some of their points. But I personally really enjoyed it. I found it really interesting. And from what I know of Scottish history, it made some interesting choices and interesting comparisons. Then for Snake on the cover, I went with The House of Blood and Bane. I was caught up in the hype train that Brianna was really selling this book during some of the readathons this year. She was really kind of advocating for reading it. So again, it felt like it was a nice happenstance. For self-published and new to you author, you can see again we've got The Foxes Say Goodnight and The Nightmare Before Christmas. TBR Vet, I went with The Ship of Magic, the first in the Live Ship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is the second Robin Hobb I've read. But I read Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first in a trilogy, and then this is the first in a different trilogy. I had been told by quite a lot of people again that this, knowing my reading tastes, they thought this trilogy would be more my style than the other one, and I definitely think it was. I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but I'm just not sure, looking back, that I cared enough about the characters to want to pick up the next book. I'm not sure. And then the final square here is from another challenge. So obviously there were loads I could have picked for this. Any of the other challenges we've already talked about. But I decided to go with Painted Devils because it was part of that 3-month-long read-along as well as the Aeldia challenges. So it felt like a nice fit. And then we have the last of the bingo boards, the last of the challenges. This is the Our Fantasy bingo board for 2025. And as I said, this one runs slightly out of sync with most of the readathons. This one runs from 1st of April through to the 31st of March. So I do have an extra 3 months on this one. So we're not panicking about it yet. First square was Knights and Paladins, and I read Ladies' Night by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. This is a sapphic, gender-flipped take on A Knight's Tale, and as soon as I read the words A Knight's Tale, I was there. I had good fun with this one. Hidden Gem, published in the 80s in high fashion, I don't have anything for right now. Hidden Gem shouldn't be too hard. High fashion, I have an idea for. Published in the 80s, I am really struggling with to find some sci-fi or fantasy I'm interested in from the 80s. I am tempted to use my one switch out, but then there are a couple coming later that I'm also not completely comfortable with. So I don't know. I will take again any recommendations you have to give. The final prompt on that row is Down with the System. I picked Hench by Natalie Zena Walshots. I was so pleasantly surprised. It's superheroes, but done in a really, really grounded, realistic way. Our main character is a kind of temp who henches for various supervillains, and when she sees how the system is designed to grind up people like her, she decides she's going to take the whole superhero world down. For Impossible Places, I really thought I would struggle, but as I said, I've been hooked on the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and that fits there perfectly. A book in parts, Elfie again. For Gods and Pantheons, Holy Terrors fitted. And for the last in a series, I read The Shepherd's Crown by Terry Pratchett. The Tiffany Aiken books are the only Discworld books I had never read. They're YA rather than adult, and I'd just never been that interested in them. Plus, The Shepherd's Crown is the last book Terry Pratchett ever wrote. So I'd been very apprehensive about picking these books up, but they came up in one of the reading groups I'm part of, and I decided to just catch them all up. So I read all 5 books in this sub-series, and The Shepherd's Crown then finishes that sub-series, but also finishes Discworld as a whole. The book did have a beginning, middle, and an end, and it wasn't a bad book, but you can tell that Pratchett never got the chance to go back and flesh it out the way he would have liked. There were sections that felt a little bit underdeveloped, but it did break my heart at the beginning. It's one of, I would say, his most emotional books. Then for book club or read along book, it has to be one of the R Fantasy Book Club readathon books, which does make it a little bit trickier than I originally thought. But there are so many R Fantasy Book Clubs, it's never a challenge to find something for easy mode. And I read The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. It kind of mashes up your epic grim fantasy with a mystery element. It took me a while to get into it, but once we really focused on Helena and how she was running her own investigation, then I was really fascinated. I definitely think I'll continue the series, but I'm not desperate to get to it. Then for a book about parents, we're popping Hymn to Dionysus back in here. Parents and parent figures and child-parent relationships were critical throughout this story in lots of different ways. It was a perfect fit. Epistolary, I am going to use Dracula Daily here as well because it is all written in letters. I don't have published in 2005, but I don't think that'll be a problem. There are plenty of books that can go in there. Author of colour, I put House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This book I would sort of pitch as a YA vampires meets Rebecca. It is a sapphic horror novel, and I had a really good time with the kind of gothic vibes of this one. For small press or self-published, I was getting maximum use out of The Hands of the Emperor, so I put that one in here as well. Biopunk and Elves and Dwarfs, I don't have anything for yet. Elves and Dwarfs, though, I do have a couple of loose ideas. Biopunk is one of those squares where I am tempted to use my word placement, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm holding out to see between that and 80s. I don't have a LGBTQIA protagonist yet, but again, that's super easy. Then for your 5 short stories, I had a mix of fantasy short stories by Johannes T. Evans and Josh Lanyon. I do not like short stories as a rule. It's not something I lean towards. And actually, before the board was announced, this is where I 100% thought I was going to use Switch Prompt Allowance. But I managed to stockpile a few of these. When I was doing the Amazing Readathon, that really rewards, from a gameplay point of view, you reading shorter books. So I had a stack of these ready and I really enjoyed them. I'm starting to find my way in short stories, I think. I'm starting to figure out what works for me and what doesn't. Stranger in a Strange Land, again, I have an idea for, but I haven't read yet. Recycle a bingo square, we have to pick a prompt from a previous year. In my head, I've already decided that I'm going to be reusing the Mundane Jobs square from the 2023 board. I didn't do our fantasy bingo in 2023. I've only done it this year and last year. So I never got to do the Mundane Jobs square. And that's a prompt I think I would really like. But depending on how much I struggle to fill it, I can pick something different for this later. Cozy sci-fi fantasy should be relatively easy. There's lots to choose from at the moment. Generic title has a specific set of words we're meant to use. There are things like numbers, colours, or things like A Court of Thorns and Roses. I have to look through the list, but I definitely will have books on my shelf that fit it. Then for not a book, the point was exactly what it says, something sci-fi or fantasy, but not a book. My hope for this was I was going to go and see a production of Terry Pratchett's Feet of Clay, but I managed to mess up my social calendar so badly, and I was actually visiting Bristol at the time I was meant to be in Edinburgh for this. So I had to change it out. Instead, I watched Severance through Apple TV. We had a brief trial, and I decided I was going to see what all the hype was about. We watched both seasons. And although I was hooked in the first, I felt like strange things were happening just to be strange. And I don't think it really paid off in the end. The world didn't feel cohesive to me. And the last square, not to end on a downer, is pirates. And I love pirates. I love pirates as a historical thing. I love looking into it. I love it as a visual medium. I love it as an aesthetic. I love it in movies. Pirates in books, I struggle with. But because I love them so much, I continually read pirates in books. And this one was one I should have skipped. I read Vengeance by Emma Newman, which is pitched as pirates and vampires in the kind of 1700s with a very Dumas type, revenge story. And honestly, it just failed to deliver on every single aspect of that. So I read it as a buddy read and I did enjoy the taking part with the group, but the book itself was a letdown. So those are my challenges for the year so far, and I am going to cut back to real me.
So there you have it. That is how I'm doing in all my challenges so far this year. I'm pretty happy overall. The monthly ones, I'm glad that I'm keeping up. That is, in a way, takes care of itself as long as I'm getting those books read. I've not been super focused on reading them in the month they're specifically for, as long as I read them around about that time. So that's given me a bit of flexibility, but also kept me on track. The ones I'm struggling the most with are the SFF Title Challenge and the Book Pictionary Challenge. I can see myself falling further and further back because the ones I have left aren't ones I have anything particularly in mind for. So if you have any suggestions, especially for those two challenges, then please do let me know in the comments. I would really appreciate it. I think I need to maybe expand my horizons a little bit on these two. I'm going to link to all of the challenge hosts, all of the announcement posts in the description below. So if you want to check out these challenges, you probably still have time to catch up. I really hope you've enjoyed going through these with me. It's given me a new sense of focus, and I think I know where I really want to spend some of my reading time in the next couple of months. If you've enjoyed the video, please leave me a comment. I'd love if you could like and subscribe to the channel. And if you don't have anything else you want to say, but you want to leave a comment, then leave me a book stack emoji. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.